The title is the topic. Today I'm talking about hiding laziness.
Welcome to the second episode in our multi-part series exploring the roles and representations of feminist frequency. This project examines the tropes, plot devices, and patterns most commonly associated with Keesian from a systemic, big-picture perspective.
I already did one video on this topic,
so if you haven't seen it yet, please check that one out before continuing to watch this one.
So now let's look at the Kickstarter update itself. Update 27, How Our Tropes vs. Women project has expanded and transformed. As I look forward to plans and goals for feminist frequency in 2015, I'm reflecting on our Tropes vs. Women in Video Games project and how far we've come. 2 years into the project, I'd like to share some thoughts with you about what we set out to do and what we've accomplished so far. The original plan. Here Anita is giving a description of why she started the project and what her goals were. She originally planned videos would be about 10 to 12 minutes with simple explanations and some examples. So what happened? She talks about how things went beyond expectations and she expanded the project. She also mentions how she has a bigger spotlight and harassment. Here she talks about how she would have to break down her videos to explain feminist theory to a broader audience. If she has to educate people to see games the way she does, it brings up one question. Do the games have the problem, or does Anita have the problem? If she can find games she already likes,
in one of my favorite games of all time, Beyond Good and Evil,
why not just encourage developers to make new games instead of attacking existing games?
Most recently, Double Dragon Neon in 2012 reintroduced new gamers to this regressive crap yet again.
There is no reason we cannot have a variety. There is nothing inherently wrong with what a lot of these developers do. Anita is telling people these are problems. She is educating people to see it the way she does. Back in 2012, I never imagined that the initial surge of harassment would not only increase in volume, but continue for years to come. One thing was immediately apparent, however. The harassers had made it their mission to pick apart and distort every minuscule detail of my work and even my personal life in order to try to discredit, defame, and ultimately silence me. My arguments and examples had to be airtight. I felt I could not afford to make a single mistake or error. That was, and is, a lot of pressure. I will agree with her on one point, picking apart every minuscule detail of her personal life. At the end of the day, you have to defeat her arguments. However, as far as picking apart every minuscule detail of her work, let me enlighten my audience about her complaints about the treatment of Princess Peach.
The ill-fated princess, and she's kidnapped in 13 of them. Peach is kinda accidentally playable in this one. Sadly, Peach has never been a playable character again in the main franchise. The princess is still excluded from the action. Force her back into the damsel role again and again. And Princess Peach's role is essentially that of the ball. The two men are tossing her back and forth over the course of the main series, each trying to keep and take possession of the damsel ball.
And then her complaints about the treatment of Princess Zelda.
Over the course of more than a dozen games spanning a quarter century, all of the incarnations of Princess Zelda have been kidnapped, cursed, possessed, turned to stone, or otherwise disempowered at some point.
Anita spent a great deal of time nitpicking Princesses Zelda and Peach when it comes to their damseling, and she also picks apart a lot of the aspects of the damsel in distress. If she is going to nitpick that much and then turn around and talk about receiving the same treatment, all I can say is boo-hoo. I have no sympathy for you if people want to pick apart your work. Making these videos is a balancing act of trying to offer comprehensive theoretical framework stated in a widely accessible language while also trying to be bulletproof. She said trying to stay bulletproof. I want to reference this clip from my review of Damsel in Distress Part 2.
It's interesting to note that the reverse scenario, games hinging on a woman vowing revenge for her murdered boyfriend or husband, are practically non-existent.
Practically non-existent. She never said they don't exist. You have to carefully analyze Anita's language, as I'm about to demonstrate why.
The gender role reversal is so unusual that it borders on the absurd. Which is one of the reasons why the scene from Disney's Wreck-It Ralph is so humorous.
Anita went to a clip from a cartoon to say how humorous it is when the role is reversed, and Anita is intentionally picking one of the most silly scenes there are when the role is reversed. In the movie Salt, Angelina Jolie's boyfriend is murdered, and at the end, she escapes and plans to hunt down the other KA sleeper agents.
The gender role reversal is so unusual that it borders on the absurd.
In Kill Bill, Uma Thurman's fiance is murdered at her wedding, and she seeks revenge by killing all the other assassins and Bill himself.
The gender role reversal is so unusual that it borders on the absurd.
In Terminator 1, Kyle Reese dies at the end, and Sarah Connor has to kill the Terminator herself to save her unborn child, so he can save the human race.
The gender role reversal is so unusual that it borders on the absurd.
How is the role reversal absurd when I can so easily find movies that are not absurd? There is nothing bulletproof about crafting your language around a hand-picked clip from a cartoon, no less, to make it sound worse than it is. This is just one example of the nonsense I find in her videos, and this kind of crap exists in all 3 damsel in distress videos. We aim to reach as many people as possible while making our arguments solid enough so that folks who are on the fence won't be easily lured in by the harasser's torrent of misrepresentations and fabrications. Want to see how solid Anita Sarkeesian's facts are?
It'd be great to finally see Zelda, Sheik, and Tetra as the protagonists of their own games. And not just mobile DS games, I'm talking full-on console adventures.
Zelda as a protagonist in a full-on console adventure. How did she miss that game with a $158,000 Kickstarter meant to do research? Either she left it out to make that talking point, or her research is lazy.
Studied extensively.
Now let's break down a statement you made about the following games.
Even with newer games that feature 4-player options like the new Super Mario Bros. Wii and Wii U, the princess is still excluded from the action. She's been replaced with another Toad instead, as to allow Nintendo to force her back into the damsel role again and again.
Replaced with Toad. At face value, this seems correct when you compare it to Super Mario Bros. 2. However, did you not notice that Wart was the last boss in Part 2, and Bowser is the last boss here? After digging around, I found this article quoting Masataka Takimoto. In Super Mario Bros. 2, Princess Peach had her own unique moves and animation. In this series, we want all the players to have the same movements and animation as Mario, and Princess Peach isn't suited for that. On top of that, the whole plot for most Mario games is to rescue Princess Peach from Bowser. To my knowledge, she was never intended to be playable in these games, as I have not found anything to indicate otherwise. If that is the case, Peach was not intended to be playable. So how was she replaced? And she wasn't forced into the damsel role, as that is usually her part in the core franchise.
She's been replaced with another Toad instead, force her back into the damsel role.
I have a quote saying she was never intended to be playable in those games, yet Anita said she was replaced. You cannot replace someone who was never intended to be playable.
Bayonetta is a widely popular video game that was released earlier this year in the US and late last year in Japan for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. First, the positive things about the game. She's a single mother, and that's kind of it.
Bayonetta was not a single mother in that game, and the Bayonetta review no longer exists on Anita's Feminist Frequency channel. Not only are her arguments full of holes, but so is her YouTube channel, as it is now missing videos. Here she talks about the emotional toll on her.
How do I deal with trolls? It's an ongoing process. I'm kind of used to it at this point. I just sort of ignore them as they come through.
She does mention that her supporters also get harassed. Here she talks more about how her harassment has slowed down her work. I'll go to this section. Nearly half of my time is spent raising awareness on the epidemic of online harassment and working to help change policies on an institutional level. If you watched my previous video, you will notice this was one of the complaints from her backers. Man, I love how much Anita's mission exploded after this campaign, but I will say I am worried that with all the various talks, presentations, and appearances she is doing, I fear this initial video project will never quite get finished. Anita did, however, say this before her Kickstarter.
So one of the ways that I deal with this, one, I'm going to do a research study about harassment that women face on YouTube as a way to funnel my anger and frustration at this.
Despite the fact her own backers are raising concerns about the lack of videos they invested money in, Anita would rather spend almost half of her time on her harassment. She is using the $158,000 Kickstarter project as a platform to talk about harassment.
One, I'm going to do a research study about harassment that women face on YouTube as a way to funnel my anger and frustration at this.
She said before her Kickstarter that is what she wanted to do, talk about harassment. And despite the fact one of her backers had a legitimate concern, she wants to just brush it off, even though she could simply ignore the trolls.
I just sort of ignore them as they come through. You
did not raise $158,000 to talk about harassment, you raised it to talk about games.
I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I run the video web series Feminist Frequency. In this particular project, which I'm calling Tropes versus Women in Video Games, I'm going to create a series of 5 videos that look at and deconstruct the most common and the most stereotypical representations of women in games. So please donate any amount you can to bring this video series to life.
If your backers want more videos, it is no one's fault other than your own, Anita. The current scope of the project. I have a lot I want to say about this section, so I'll put it into a third video dedicated to it. What we've accomplished. This paragraph talks about YouTube and Twitter numbers. It also mentions Jonathan McIntosh's article and video. My biggest gripe with this is McIntosh and Anita both worked on this video, and they both work on the Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series. Instead of finishing that, they took time to work on a side project. Here she is talking about a paradigm shift, how reporters question developers more and bring up gender issues in games. One discussion I could have is not the shift, it is how the shift is being brought about. And that in and of itself could take a whole video. Here she says she's spoken to developers and had others comment on her work. Just standard stuff. Players, creators, and educators are taking our videos as a starting point and expanding the conversation about representations in games within their own communities. Educators are using her videos. Videos that have factual inaccuracies, misrepresentations, and lazy research.
Studied extensively.
And they are learning from Anita Sarkeesian, who lacks the ability to acknowledge any flaws in her work. And she is continuing to make educational tools with this inability to accept when she is wrong. There is nothing inherently special about her that makes her above making mistakes. She is just a pop culture critic. Nothing more, nothing less. Financials. When our Kickstarter campaign ended on June 16th, 2012, we raised a total of $158,922. Here is a breakdown of how the funds have been used. I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to say. Her comments on YouTube are closed. January 24th. I've had to report a bunch of abuse this week. Impressed with Twitter @supports new streamlined reporting system. Anita has very well managed the harassment she receives by moderating and reporting harassment. She spent 3% on online security. 44% on salary and wages, yet she just said she spends almost half of her time focusing on harassment.
Studied extensively.
If she spent such a small amount on online security and almost half of her Kickstarter money on salaries and wages, how come her videos are coming along so slowly? 44% of her Kickstarter funds is around $70,000. That is over 10 times her original asking amount of $6,000 spent on salaries and wages, yet she is 2 years late. And why is that?
One, I'm going to do a research study about harassment that women face on YouTube as a way to funnel my anger and frustration at this.
It is because she chooses to spend almost half of her time on her harassment. She has made that such a priority in her life that she put almost 7,000 people on the back burner for over 2 years. She was supposed to be done by the end of 2012, yet she acknowledges she talks a lot about harassment when she could ignore it and serve her backers.
I just sort of ignore them as they come through. I just sort of ignore them as they come through. I just sort of ignore them as they come through.
Here she is talking about her 501c3 status and her visions for more projects. Over 2 years late on her Kickstarter project, and she is already planning more projects. She already put her Kickstarter project on hold to do the 25 hidden benefits, and she is basically telling everyone to expect more of the same. I'll cover the PDF file real quick. It talks about some of her accomplishments and some stats on her videos. Not a whole lot I feel like nitpicking. However, I will cover a couple of things. She raised almost $500,000 in 1 year and produced 2 videos on her series.
Studied extensively.
Look at quarter 4. That is toward the end of the year, when Gamergate became a thing. Remember how Anita acknowledged she spends a lot of time focusing on harassment? Nearly half of her time. It also seems she has made it into a lucrative opportunity, as several other things in this report support that notion, given the height of her popularity last year came around October, shortly after Gamergate exploded. Top 5 tweets. 4 in October, 1 in August. I hope this update has provided you with some insight into this ongoing project and our process in putting together each episode. I know many of you wish we would produce episodes faster, but each video is a massive undertaking, and I do not want to compromise the comprehensive, in-depth analysis and high production quality that you have come to expect from Feminist Frequency. Tropes versus women in video games is still my top priority, and our next episode, Women as Reward, is currently in production. I am very proud of the work we are doing and the impact it is having on the industry at large. Your top priority? Let me get this right. You spend nearly half your time talking about your harassment. You have made many public appearances to talk about harassment. You put your project on hold to do 25 hidden benefits, and you are already planning to do more projects before you have finished your Kickstarter videos that are 2 years overdue. And they are your top priority. I thank each of you for supporting this Kickstarter before you had any idea what these videos were really going to be about, and I thank you for your patience as we continue on this roller coaster of a journey. Sincerely, Anita. You said in this update what these videos were originally supposed to be. Originally, I anticipated creating 10 to 12 minute videos for each trope. The Damsel in Distress became a 3-part miniseries, clocking in at just over 1 hour. They didn't want a 3-part miniseries. They wanted what you originally advertised. The original Kickstarter message said each video will be between 10 and 20 minutes long and available online for free for everyone and anyone to watch, share, and use. It says nothing about turning your videos into these multi-part series that will take over 2 years to complete. Yet now you are saying that people had no idea what these videos were really going to be about. They invested in you for what you advertised. Now you are creating a new narrative. You are telling your backers to accept what you want to do instead of delivering what they invested in. This is what one of your own backers said. With all the stretch goals, she was slated to do 12 videos total. Currently, she has done 6 videos, many multi-part discussions originally listed as 1 video, and so she's halfway through the number of videos, but only a small fraction of the way through the various topics she wanted to cover in this series. The original goal for release on these was 2012, and here we are hitting 2015. I'm not shooting criticism or anything, just voicing my fear about never getting to see this through and how sad that makes me. Right now, I'm feeling like I'd be lucky to see 2 to 3 new videos in 2015. One of your own backers was disappointed in your lack of content. While some of the backers supported you due to harassment, there are those that actually did want the videos. Instead of delivering, you give a huge update that in essence says, oh, those videos? Sorry, I want to talk about my harassment and I have other projects. This massive update was nothing but one huge excuse intended to appease people that are not receiving what they invested in. It is full of nothing but a bunch of excuses. Some of these backers feel sorry for you after this update. You don't owe your backers an explanation, you owe them an apology. Remember that section I talked about saving for another video? The current scope of the project? Stay tuned for part 3. If you like this video, I have a playlist tackling Anita Sarkeesian and her work, and encourage you to check it out. It also includes reviews of her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series.
I get a lot of support from people who really like my videos, and they've even been used as educational tools in classrooms. Educational tools.
I leave my audience with one question.